The Misfits.
Hey everybody, welcome to the first ever live stream recording for the Misfits.
That's right. I'm liking this pretty much so far, especially with the intro dropping in. We get to hear it, gets me hyped up, dancing a little bit beforehand. So yeah, I like this live setup so far.
Let us know in the comments about Brandon's dancing, how that's doing it for you. So we have done some live things before. You know, I recorded some live episodes at Reach Gathering last fall.
Yep.
We recorded a couple of interviews at More Than a Game.
Mm-hmm.
But we have not actually done a full-on episode on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, on Twitter Live, assuming that all of this is actually working.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, we're going to start off by mentioning the fact that with this being the first time, we've got new software, we've got all this stuff. We finally got my soundboard working. You know, see?
There we go. Do we need to turn off the intro?
So, yeah, we're turning it off. Don't worry.
Okay.
So, what we are going to be doing is we are actually going to be going through and actually doing a normal Ministry Misfits episode, assuming that it's actually working correctly. That includes commercials and everything. So don't be surprised if there's some bugs because, again, this is all new, and this is kind of a test run, but it's going to be a fun test run because it's actually for real.
Yeah, and the cool thing about this, as we continue to go through with these live setups, everybody gets this. I'll say exclusively, unexclusively right now.
Yeah, we're offering it for free tonight because we're testing it. We don't want to charge people for something that we're not sure is actually going to work.
Correct. But for our exclusive Patreon levels that we have where you can support us, so there's about 4 different levels that you can find out about on ministrymisfits.com.
Patreon.com/Ministry Misfits.
Thank you.
Yes.
This is the other way to get there. The more direct way. This live stream will be more exclusive ways where you can actually interact with us and join in. So why don't you lay the ground rules for us,
now,
Andrew, before
today,
we get started?
Since everybody can interact, what we are going to be doing, if you guys want to leave us some comments, leave us some questions, let us know if you can actually hear us. That'd be a good first step. All that good stuff. We should be able to actually see your comments, assuming that I actually set it up right. The only exception of that may be Twitter. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to see your comments. However, I should get notice on my phone that you're trying to contact us. So, all that being said, let us know if you can hear us. Let us know what's going on. A couple of ground rules in general, though. Again, be patient with us. We're working out some bugs. Same ground rules that we have in our the Facebook community group on Facebook, obviously. As far as, love God, love people, don't be mean, protect people's privacies, don't be a troll, all that good stuff. We don't have a way to moderate the comments just yet as far as making sure that people are following the rules, but we can see them. So just be aware of that.
And Jesus can see.
And Jesus is watching. So with that being said, also for this first part of the episode here, we are recording our normal episode. So we see your comments. We are taking note of your comments, but we may not get to them in the middle of the episode. We are going to do some question and answer here towards the end. Although if it's a really good one that it's like, oh, this is perfect for what we're talking about, we may still throw it in. Who knows?
Yep.
With that being said, this episode that is being recorded right now will be the episode that comes out on Tuesday, May 10th. So the video, obviously, you're going to be able to watch because you're watching it right now. The audio, though, will be put out through the normal channels on May 10th. And with that being said, we need to introduce our guest for today. So joining us today is... and I hope I actually say it right because we finally got it down, and now I'm probably going to butcher it.
I've got it.
Okay, you've got it. You go for it.
All right, we've got Arthur Aghajanian. So, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Perfect.
So, you are here I don't honestly remember where it was we found each other. I believe it was Christian Podcasters Association. But you and I were talking about you actually starting your own show, doing that kind of stuff. And then as we got talking, we realized you should just come on ours also. And so we are going to talk about your specialty, which is art history, theology of art, all of those good things. So let's start off. Introduce yourself, what you're currently working on, some of your background.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Andrew. I'm working in the area of what's called theological aesthetics, which is a way of understanding the spiritual dimension of our lives through visual culture. So that can take the form of art history, or it can be in the images and objects that make up contemporary worship in any religion. And it can extend to our larger visual culture that's made up out of our everyday environment and the images that we use to navigate the world and understand the nature of reality. And my work is writing on artworks and on visual culture and exploring Christian principles through their embodiment in images, understanding them from a different perspective and providing a new lens, specifically contemplative lens, on Christian truths, Christian faith, basic principles of all religions through images and the way that we read images and understand them as meaning makers.
Awesome. So with that being said, this is going to be the first conversation we have with Arthur here. This one is dealing much more with a couple of things that both him and I in our conversations discovered. We both have a couple of like banging our head against the wall type beefs with the way these sort of things go within Protestantism in general. We normally specialize more in evangelicalism. Mm-hmm. We're going to broaden this one out a little bit to Protestantism.
I think that's how you make a lot of your friends is
by
what collective out. Group, and we're in this small group over here, so let's become friends, and how can we talk about a topic together? Yes. I like it.
So with that being said, we're going to break this up into 2 or 3 different categories here, like we've been doing more recently. We're going to start out just by talking about imagery in general. And so when we talk imagery, there's some weird things that go on within, depending on which brand of Protestantism you are in, the way it's presented. So let's start out with the fact that, well, I'll ask you, because I've already asked him, but I haven't asked you this yet. How often within a Protestant church obviously it's going to be a little bit different depending on where you're coming from. How often do you see the use of imagery within the worship service?
It's a good question. Within the worship set, like so on a given Sunday, basically is what you're thinking.
Either it's very prominent within the sanctuary. It's actually something that is used regularly as part of the worship service. It's something that the pastor makes mention of a lot, something like that. How often do you see that normally?
Well, I would say the first thing that I've typically seen, again, in just my own personal experience, is one, the church itself exemplifies the art. So whether it's the glass or pictures or something else, it's already kind of set up within the sanctuary. So it's not necessarily that piece of the worship, but it's one of the first things that you see, or you see it throughout your time there at the church. And then for the other parts, I think it depends upon the updated technology of the church.
Well, there's that.
As far as what is being portrayed, if the pastor is putting something on the screen behind him, then you might see some of the imagery portrayed out, especially as they go through scripture to try to create a visual to the scripture and just provide more context.
So part of what you described there is what we are going to be talking about today. The other part of what you described there is what we talked about last week, you and I, and what everybody is going to hear when they tune in on Tuesday when we talk with Dr. Joshua Smith about technology and robots and artificial intelligence. That stuff is what the words on the screen with a background, all of that.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily what we're talking about today. So, Arthur, let's start by you have written multiple pieces and been interviewed on multiple things about why is it that there is a lack of imagery within the Protestant church compared to our Catholic or Orthodox brothers and sisters?
Right. Well, let's go into a little bit of history. Protestantism tends to shy away from notions of spiritual formation regarding imagery and other senses. During the Reformation, the overreaches of the Catholic Church led many of the reformers to want to deconstruct church theology. They wanted a clean slate and to rely only on the authority of Scripture. And then traditional Christian practices were labeled oftentimes unessential or unbiblical. But historically, the church has been a supporter and a proponent of the arts. Many aspects of Catholic practice were deemed idolatrous by the forefathers of the Protestant movement. They felt that the practices of the church took away from the focus on Jesus Christ. And there was an excess of extra biblical teachings and doctrines that circled the Catholic hierarchy. But the Protestant tradition began to be fearful of anything remotely Roman Catholic when they were attempting to overturn what was going on. It was sort of a throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of situation. And while the Reformation was vital in establishing things like the priesthood of all believers, salvation by faith alone, and other important theological doctrines, they also discarded many practices that were of great value. And the aesthetic and the reverent environments of the Eastern Orthodox services and also the Catholic Mass are really foreign to Protestants. And this lack of embodiment through images can easily lead to a stagnation in the church experience, especially if you broaden it out and take into consideration other elements of artistic culture like music, song, and dance.
Yeah. So let's break that down a little bit further of that church experience. How would you take that a step further on what that means to either deepen our relationship with Christ or just to have a further representation?
Well, when we step into a holy and a sacred place, there's a dramatic feeling. There's this sense that we've moved into another world. So, for example, if you walk into a large church or a cathedral that's on a busy city street, you're leaving all the noise and all the commotion and all the distraction of the street and walking into a space that's really another dimension. And this is critical for bringing us into that place where we can start to commune with the sacred. So it sets us up to pass into that place of silent reverence and a recognition of God's presence. So there's all of the decisions that are made in creating sacred spaces are purposeful and particular, and typically certainly with the great cathedrals that we find in Europe, for example, no detail has been left unconsidered, and every surface of the church and every aspect of the space that's been created for worship, the interior of the church, has been worked through and considered carefully. And keep in mind also that some of these great cathedrals were built over hundreds of years. Can you even think of anything that we build nowadays that we would spend hundreds of years on? It's something that doesn't even
other than
it's not even
our
part of what we
interstate.
do.
Yeah, our interstate system seems to think that 100 years is a
our
pretty.
Our highways in Akron are always under construction here in Ohio, but that's a different story.
now, real quick, because part of what you were talking about here, we talked about pre-Brandon with Jason Hunley when we were talking Worship Wars. We talked about with David Waddell when we talked about his book Worship Wars. We've talked about it with Greg doing ecclesiology. All this different stuff is this idea of when you walk into the building and it puts you in the place of, okay, I'm ready to worship. Part of what we also, you already said about the whole thing within not Christianity, within Protestantism. Within Protestantism is this idea of they were getting rid of some of the idolatrous practices within Catholicism. One of the big ones that we hear, the objection, at least for those of us that within Protestantism are a part of more Reformed Protestant groups, is that there is a problem with the use of imagery because it is a violation of the second commandment, which is, don't make any gods out of anything. We're going to show a couple art pieces here. I think this should show up for everybody, including you, Arthur, assuming that I set it up right. Now, we're going to talk through a couple of these different things because is it going to play? There it goes. So, we've got a bunch of these art pieces that are, they're old, obviously. Most of them are pretty famous. Some of them are paintings. Some of them are on buildings. Some of them are separate from buildings, all these different things. But as we go through, there's a common theme among the European styles compared to the ones that were done in more of the Middle East or in the Indian subcontinent of Asia there in the Middle East as well. One is, I'm going to wait for them to cycle through so that I can make sure that I remember to say
touch on all of them.
Yes. So one of the big ones is in the skin complexion of everybody involved.
Mm-hmm.
The whole white Jesus thing is a big problem within not just Protestantism. This is a big problem within the way that the church treats worship, which this last picture is in there as kind of not a joke, or not that picture, the one before of Jesus knocking
at the door. Yeah.
Because even with that, we'll get to that in a minute. I'm just calling that picture out because it came across my screen. So white Jesus is one reason that people have a problem with it. The second one is that they're saying that any image that tries to depict God or Jesus is making a false image of God, and so therefore is a violation of the second commandment. And then the third one that we saw throughout there is that in most of the Catholic imagery is that Jesus is small and Mary is big. And so they're saying that it's actually putting the worship focus onto Mary and not Jesus. So we'll start with the second commandment violation first and then work our way through. And then before we go to our first break, I'll tell you why I called out that one picture of Jesus knocking specifically. So Arthur, let's start with how do you respond? Actually, you said you had never heard this before. So I'll say, how would you respond now that you've heard this? People that are saying that the use of imagery in terms of the artwork, especially of Jesus or of God, which is all throughout the great cathedrals of Europe and even into India and everything else. How do you respond to people that say this is a violation of the second commandment?
Yeah. I was what you're referring to, I think, regarding my not having heard of this before, is I was surprised to find that there are many people who feel like any kind of representation of Jesus is a problem. I hadn't realized that the situation was so extreme. I don't have any personal contact with any community like that, but there are so many different types of Christianities and different types of Christian belief systems. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Anyway, it's certainly interesting. If we start with, let's take the quote from Exodus that speaks to this, and it's the same in Deuteronomy. It's Exodus 20, verses 4-6, and it reads, "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." This passage is about idolatry. It's not about art or images. The key thing here is that part of the passage that reads, "You shall not bow down to them or worship them." It's forbidding the making out of an image, forbidding the image of God made from a creature, of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. God is the creator and is distinct from the creature. So there's something there that needs to be understood, and that is that living things can be artistically depicted. First of all, there are entire chapters in the Old Testament devoted to artistic design and craftsmanship of the tabernacle and the temple. Exodus, Kings, Chronicles, Second Chronicles, Ezekiel. If sculpting and painting images of living things were forbidden, then you have to ask, why does God direct that cherubim be sculpted to preside over the Ark of the Covenant and also be woven into the veil of the Holy of Holies, as well as commanding embroidery of lilies and pomegranates? Solomon's temple displayed lions, bulls, and cherubim. That's in 1 Kings. What is explicitly forbidden is the making of figures or objects representative of God as objects of worship. When God commanded the construction of the temple, he insisted that there be no physical representations of a deity. There was a lot of use of color and shape and images from the natural world. We read about fruit and trees, flowers, land, and water, but no images of God himself. And we can read about this in 1 Kings. So Scripture doesn't forbid the making of representational art, but rather the worship of it. To worship art is wrong, but to make art is not. And banning images is not the answer. Dealing with actually our idolatrous heart is really the issue.
Exactly.
Art can be an idol, and love of art can become idolatrous, but this is true of all good things. We can turn loved ones, we can turn our jobs, we can turn our relationships, our families, and we can turn our churches into idols. We can idolize.
And that really is where we're going with even the other problems that we see, well, that are called out about these these representations. We'll go, you already addressed in a lot of ways the problems with the idea of worshiping the art. But the other side of it, both with the Mary side and the white Jesus side, is that sometimes what these pieces of art also show us is where the heart of the person making them actually is. And so, we can we can actually skip over the Mary conversation for another time because,
it goes a lot deeper.
Yes, it goes a lot deeper. And, there are some people within the Catholic Church that actually worship Mary, but that is not actually what the teaching of the Catholic Church is. And so
Actually,
I think that's
I wanted to, sorry to interrupt that, but I did want to point out before I lost the moment, if your viewers and listeners want to get an idea of what Mary can represent, in the form of the Virgin and Child motif, which was a very common image in pre-Renaissance art in the medieval period. I have a piece that you can find on my website. My website archives all of my writings, which explores the relationship between Mary and Jesus in that form of representation. What the specific form of Mary holding the infant Jesus can mean, and how it can be read as a sign system. So it's something that might provoke some thought. So I would direct your, like I said, your listeners and your viewers to that particular essay.
Awesome. So the website, for those of you that are listening and cannot see, is imageandfaith.com. It's all spelled out. There's no symbols, anything like that. So it's imageandfaith.com. And on his website, you'll be able to find a ton of essays, a ton of teasers to essays that he then directs you where to go find them, which really confused me the first time I was looking through there. It's like, wow, this is very short for a blog post. I was always told it was supposed to be a lot longer, and then I realized that it was just a blurb. Brandon's
my website it's an archive for those, so visitors will be directed to all of the publications that the work appears in. That's
awesome.
Right.
So where were we going? Oh yeah. So, that's the Mary side of it. The other side of it is the white Jesus side of it. There's some pieces that are made of the traditional white Jesus that, when they are looked at now, we almost could argue that they are worshipped, because that image of wanting to have God look like us is really at the heart of the issue. It does not mean, though, that the person that painted it necessarily was doing so in a white supremacy manner or a idolatrous manner. But again, it's the way that we, like Arthur already said, with the other pieces of imagery within the church, or even like he had said before, the music, the other arts, that idolatrous heart is really at the issue of what we need to get to.
Yeah, because even as I was thinking about art in general, I'm just curious to when everything got twisted and mixed up. Of, we see anybody that creates art on the street, we say, oh, this is their interpretation of what they saw, what they're experiencing, how they're feeling. And so, yeah, again, we take these pictures, and for a lot of us, we take it as gospel sometimes, where, okay, this is coming straight from the Bible. And it's like, no. Again, this is the artist's representation. And so it's like, where do we get lost in all this? And again, how has that became intertwined through our faith?
we talked about this at Absurd as well, because Pastor Trey, made a joke about the white Jesus painting that was behind him. Nobody is saying that you having it is a problem. Believing that is actually who the Savior is where the problem lies. Because when we take Jesus out of the context of him being a Jew in Palestine while Palestine was under Roman rule, completely takes part of the gospel and just throws it out. And that's part of why the nice thing with some of these images that we saw, the older ones, even the ones that are more pale in complexion, the images that are used for him are not this big glowing halo, everything else. It is much more about he looks much more human, but not because we're trying to make him look like us, because we're trying to recognize the fact that this was God indwelling himself in flesh. And so we are going to try and take a break.
I was like, I definitely know we need to take one here.
We're going to try and take a break. We're hoping that this works. So Arthur, hang on 1 second. We will be right back. When we come back, we're going to go into the next part of what you've already kind of started going us into, and we're going to actually start talking the architecture side of the artistry, both for just traditional Orthodox Christianity as well as Protestantism. And so, assuming that I hit the right button, we will be right back after we hear from Laird Creative Agency.
Season 2 of the Ministry Misfits podcast and our awesome theme song are brought to you by Laird Creative Agency.
In our social media world, the next connection is always one click or scroll away, and your business has to be ready when they find you.
That's why Laird Creative is always looking for ways to step your brand up. Whether you're looking to overhaul your brand one time with a new website or want to save money by outsourcing your graphic and media content, Laird Creative Agency is here to help. Laird Creative's mission is to take the difficulty out of the creative process. With Laird Creative, you'll find a dedicated team of artists ready to tackle any creative need that your business has, big or small.
If you're looking for an easier way to share the vision of your organization through thoughtful branding and creative content, find them at lairdcreativeagency.com to get started. Mention the Ministry Misfits podcast and get a free consultation call. Laird Creative, step your brand up. All right,
welcome back. That was pretty cool to mix that in for the first time. I like that a lot.
Yeah, everybody got to miss you dancing again.
Yeah, we missed that with any of the music.
Yes.
And I also couldn't cough off set, but we're all good.
We're all good now.
Allergies are kicking in this week.
So before we figured out that we can actually use our sponsors, we were going through imagery. We've talked about a couple of problems already. You've already addressed how the images are not the problem. It's the way people approach them that is the problem. We're going to start transitioning that into a much bigger image, and that is the architecture that is used. Pretty much we're going to talk all of church history here. And some of this we actually already got started a little bit with Dr. Beth Allison Barr. When she was on back last season. We're actually going to get into it a lot more when she comes back on this season. But we're going to look, first of all, at a couple of different exteriors of different churches throughout history. Now, anybody that has watched our show, and actually, I mean watched it, sees the traditional American prairie at the beginning of everything. And that's done intentionally because, one, that's the coolest looking shot that I could find that we were allowed to use. But we're going to look through here, assuming that this actually starts up. So we've got a bunch of, these are more Orthodox traditional cathedrals that you find around the world. This one specifically is in India, assuming that it's showing what we're seeing. All throughout the world, we have very distinct looking buildings that it's very hard to say that you don't know what's going on in those buildings. That one is just cool looking.
I like that one.
I know, that one's cool looking. And then you get to the U.S. and you still know exactly what is going on there. That is definitely a church building. That is definitely a church building. And then as it grows, that is actually a building that looks pretty similar to the first church that I ever attended when I was a kid. But the architecture changes in the U.S. compared to other places in the world. And the buildings typically are getting shorter but bigger until suddenly now we're in a mall. And this is Brandon and I's church.
I was hoping you were going to show the basketball court for our church.
I couldn't. Well, we'll get to that in a minute because we're going to start actually with the exterior. because the architecture, like we already talked about, that is done for the exterior of a lot of these big cathedrals, as well as the way that it's designed, architecturally, in terms of engineering feats, was all done very much intentionally and for specific reasons. So, Arthur, start walking us through a little bit about what is the thought process behind some of the architecture, kind of the difference between what we traditionally see throughout history with the big cathedrals and everything compared to what we typically see with what we associate with Protestantism.
Okay. Well, in a way, kind of related to what you were talking about a little bit earlier regarding different representations of Jesus, every type of aesthetic is informed by social, historical, cultural, and political and economic considerations. So you can't really understand why choices are made about the way a church is designed and built unless you understand its context. So if we think about the difference between Gothic, cathedral, or a Romanesque church and the more contemporary form of church that many Protestant communities build, there are certain types of theological and philosophical and cultural circumstances that revolve around the design and the building of the spaces. Firstly, you have to keep in mind that, and to set up a simple dichotomy, we can talk about Catholicism versus Protestantism. But when I talk about Protestantism here, just to streamline that a little bit, let's just think in terms of contemporary evangelical churches, because I think that's a nice extreme, sets up a good polarity with the classic Roman Catholic cathedral. So we have to keep in mind that Roman Catholic tradition emphasizes the big C church, the one holy Catholic and apostolic church. And the local church is, you could say it's like a standardized operating subsidiary. The idea behind the Catholic Church is that this is a worldwide community. And as a consequence, its outposts in different parts of the world are built to house and provide for whoever is living in that particular region, regardless of demographic shifts, regardless of changes in the social or economic conditions. The contemporary churches that you're alluding to, they produce a system that doesn't have a theology of place. And this is a real critical thing to understand. Protestants feel a sense of duty to the place and the community where they personally live. And if the majority of the church members move from the city to the suburbs, or from one suburb to another, a new church building is constructed. Oftentimes the old building is sold, and then the function of the church is transferred to this new place where the community is congregating. So the building that houses the congregation is thought to serve a pragmatic purpose. It's a meeting house for the members. Whereas, because the Roman Catholic Church views what it does as a mission that covers the entire world, even if there's a population change in a locale, the church doesn't feel that it's relieved of its responsibility for that population. The church building in the Catholic world is an outpost of Christianity in a particular place. It's the parish concept. It's not just built for a particular group of people.
Real quick, we're going to jump in real quick, assuming that I get this actually to work, which it doesn't seem to be, so that's okay. part of what he's talking about here, he uses that word outpost intentionally, because this is a literal example of when we talk the difference between Roman and Celtic evangelism styles. So the Celtic evangelism style, which is a typically Protestant evangelistic style, is much more community focused. It's all about the culture, the context, everything has to do with that. The Roman style of evangelism, not Roman Catholicism, but Roman style of evangelism, is much more the way that Rome does everything. And so they build big forts. And in order for people to enter into the fort, they have to identify themselves as being Romans. And so we see this even in the way that the difference between the big cathedral and the small Protestant church set themselves up engineering and architecturally wise. Now, real quick, if I can... Oh, there we go. Yay, it worked.
There we go.
Yeah, it's working.
You also wanted to use that.
Yes, I finally get to use my soundboard. So in addition to that, the other side, which you were starting to work your way into, is when you enter the building, there are also very distinct things on the interior as far as why they're there. So we're going to look at some church interiors now. So you can obviously tell which ones on the inside belong to what style of church we're talking about here. And I cannot remember where any of these are from except for one, and Brandon's going to know which one that is pretty quickly. They're big open spaces in the cathedrals, tight lined pews facing the stage with the cross in the background is typically your Protestant church. This one looks really nice, just saying. And then, you've got big auditorium style. You've got some that are real thin and tiny, almost pencil style. You've got some that are kind of a mix between the two. And then you've got some now, like ours, this last one that is our church, where they're meeting inside of gymnasiums. But the way they are set up tells us a little bit, just like when we said that the problem with the images is not the image itself, it's the way that we approach it. And that the way that you approach those images shows us more about your heart in these sort of worship events than it does even, it shows much more your mindset. So Arthur, we'll have you start, and then we'll get into what these different, why the big open spaces within, the traditional styles of buildings compared to much more of what we have within modern Protestantism.
Is there a specific question?
Just what is the, well, I guess the question would be, is there something distinctive as far as why the big open cathedrals have the big paintings, the basilicas, the big paintings, why it is much more open and, I can get into the hardwood pews if we really want to. Why all of this stuff? Why is it that the interiors were designed the way they were? Because we already said the exteriors had everything to do with what the church's goals were and the context that the church was doing evangelism and worship in. But what about the interiors of the building? Is it the same thing? Is it a little bit different?
Well, again, everything is designed to evoke a specific type of, or a specific set of responses. The idea behind the church is that it's a heaven on earth. It's a meeting place of God and humankind. And it's modeled on the idea of a paradise. So when we enter into it, we're entering into a space that has a particular structure and creates an environment that evokes awe and a sense of majesty. And for this reason, the choice of materials and the way things are built is really important. There are various types of ornate statuary, things like the Stations of the Cross, which elicit the faithful lives that are lived by the saints, the purity of Mary and Jesus. The crucifix is a poignant reminder of the ultimate price that Christ paid to connect God and humankind. And the idea is that we're in a place where we can forget the everyday world, or more properly speaking, I guess, we can transcend the ordinary world. So, for example, stained glass will instill a sense of sacredness to the space. It transforms the mind of the believer. So, in employing something that mankind has made, glass, or humankind has made, and then what God has made, light, and then fusing them together, there's this union, a beautiful union. So here is the Father and his children creating something significant together, in a sense, co-creating. And the closest many Protestant churches get to these types of visual traditions and architectural traditions is maybe some scripture on the walls of the sanctuary and the cross on the mantle behind the podium of the pastor. And there's this idea that anything else is going to be a distraction, but it's significant to experience the difference. When you walk into a beautifully designed church, of course, right away, you know that you're somewhere else. It's obvious what the space is made for. It's not something that you need to really think about or take notes on any of the particular characteristics. It's a feeling that comes to you in terms of the visual, in terms of the sound, in terms of the smells, in terms of the materials that are used. And all of this is made to work together to create a sense of sacred space where you can come together with God and you can worship in a community. Even the idea of having pews, you're sharing a bench with other people, as opposed to, for example, sitting in chairs where there's still this sense of individuality. Or one really big contrast is in terms of the music. And again, we're talking about aesthetics here, just not visual aesthetics. When you have a choir singing church hymns, or when you have the entire congregation singing together, there is the coming together of multiple voices in a unity that takes the people who are singing and the people who are participating, whether it's the choir or the congregation or both, it takes them out of themselves into something that's much larger. Whereas in many of the contemporary evangelical churches, in an attempt to relate well to contemporary audiences and the lifestyle that we're familiar with, you'll have popular music being played on electric instruments, which is oftentimes very loud and it drowns out any kind of participation with it in terms of other people singing or following along with it. It's got that kind of it's got a performative aesthetic to it, which is not about bringing people together in this unified way where you are part of a larger community of people and you're all doing something together. It's more kind of like the pastor speaking to the congregation. It's just coming at you, as opposed to inviting you in to participate with it. And then oftentimes you'll only see the image of maybe a crucifix in a Protestant church, attesting to the death of Jesus, and this idea of transferring the memorabilia almost of the cross becomes like a cornerstone of faith, and it becomes the primary point of focus. But this can be dangerous because it communicates a theological undertone that's about the penal substitution view, which I personally don't subscribe to, and it ignores the union with Christ's sanctifying life and resurrection. So there's very particular types of theological underpinnings behind how a Protestant church is designed and how a Catholic church is designed. But the problem with many churches today of all types is that their primary purpose in creating a sacred space and bringing you to a place of connectedness with others and with God, that sensibility is gone because there are other priorities that took over.
Right. And that's what we were going to do another break here in a commercial, but my production side of the screen is frozen, so I can't. But the rest of it is still working, so we're good. We're going to start transitioning in because this is where you and I started talking and getting very much more excited about doing this whole thing. There are a couple of things, like you said, where with the way it is designed, that it has caused there to be some distractions. And we want to address this because this is one that evangelicalism has a little bit more of a problem with than even the rest of Protestantism. And that is in the way that the building is designed, as well as the actual interior of the building is designed. And so we're going to actually start with the interior of the building. You already kind of alluded to it. When we talk about the big cathedrals, you've got the imageries, you've got a much more sense of there's a large gathering, the high ceilings, give you a sense of the presence of God, all that kind of thing. The focus is much more on the worship of a creator God than in our place in that creation. But when you start talking evangelical churches, Brandon, we'll ask you, and we even have some fun things if you get it wrong now. So
true, yeah. Fun for
me,
yeah,
for me. So when you walk into a traditional American Protestant church and you walk into the sanctuary, what is it that you see most, what is right there in the front and center?
The name is blanking me right now, so I'm going to forget, but obviously the stand for the pastor or the preacher. Why am I forgetting the name?
Would you be going for a pulpit?
Pulpit, thank you. Is
Yay!
The word. There we go. All right. 2 points.
Yes. So
I was going to say that or the big, large screens on the
right.
corners.
Well, and both of those
those were my two.
Right.
And also the cross, which is...
Well, and even with that...
Which could be on the pew or the pulpit.
Right. The cross is normally on the pulpit or it's on the wall, and you can only see part of it because of where the pulpit is.
Mm-hmm.
That's because within evangelicalism and within Protestantism, especially here in the West, is that the church service fully revolves around the sermon. It is all about walking into the building, hearing the sermon, having the pastor tell you what you need to do, and then you go back home until next week. That is not what the design of the cathedrals bring. It's much more about a worship aspect, and ironically, even though it was not designed for community evangelism, it brings more of a community sense of worship and finding our place in the big scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at evangelicalism and Protestantism, we are so focused in on the sermon that oftentimes we forget about the other side of why we gather.
Yeah.
And we talked about this a little bit with Dr. Linville, is that we saw this even within our COVID era since we're kind of now, we almost can say we're out of the COVID era, but not quite.
I hope so.
We're close. It depends on who you ask on social media, obviously, but we're almost out of the COVID era. But we talked about the fact that COVID exposed how weak our worship services actually were. Because when you are not in a place where you are automatically having to focus in on the pulpit, which is how our churches are designed, it's very hard to be engaged when the entire service is around just the pastor telling you what to do. When you have a service, when you have a worship experience, it changes everything. We're lucky in the fact that we actually have a very good worship team at our church.
Yeah, and I will admit on here that even watching live, or I shouldn't say live, a recording or live virtually through a church sermon or session, the worship just seems different. And I think it does wake you up to, okay, what's my heart posture of going to worship? Is it because I like the live music and I'm worshiping with other believers or community members, or is it to be in fellowship with God? And so as you sit there just on the screen, it's like, well, this isn't the song I want to hear this morning, or this is what I had planned. Like you said, it does start to catch you a little bit of what's my intentions or the heart behind why I'm going to church or why I'm worshiping, why I'm listening to the pastor preach.
And now we're back at the beginning with going into what we were talking about with Commandment 2. Of it's all about the heart behind why you are doing these sort of things. Both when right now we're mainly talking about you as a member of the church. We are not necessarily talking about the leadership yet. We're getting there. I'm sure you're shocked about that. Now, Arthur, we haven't shared your story yet. But on your website, the part of your story you share actually kind of plays into this whole thing that we were just talking about, because you grew up Christian, left Christianity, but what brought you back was actually being able to see, the beauty of worshiping God. And it came through a lot of the imagery and artistry that you studied and that you've seen and that you've even created yourself as an artist, correct?
Yeah, I think that the fact that images have always been important to me and something that I've always studied and contemplated in person as well as in reproduction, images from all over the world, both the images of our visual culture as well as in art history, that might have kept me closer to a sense for the sacred. I mean, I was always spiritually inclined anyway. I was never not a spiritual person, but I might have been more open to traditions from the East, for example, because I was exposed to the images of the East, and with those, the philosophical and theoretical and religious underpinnings of those images. So it makes you a little bit more cosmopolitan when you're looking at the productions of other cultures and other societies. It opens you up. It makes you curious. It gets you in a place where you're looking to make connections between different things. So it is possible that my love of images and my study of visual culture has kept me close to things that are of a spiritual nature as well.
Now, Arthur, I'm curious, were any of those images, I'll say, more modern or updated to the fact that the ones that Andrew showed earlier in the show have been around for many years, and I think that's typically what we see within the church as well. And I feel like we don't see enough updated representations, or we kind of talked about this with our first episode of season 2 of memorizing scripture. Just different ways that you can experience scripture or God's word differently, whether that's visual, through auditory, and just different ways that you can experience the Lord. And I feel like we don't see enough modern representations specifically in the church. So I'm just curious if there's anything more updated, east or west, that also kind of brought you back into the church.
The question of the artist's role in the church community in the West today is hotly debated these days. There's a sense that the church community has forgotten the artist, that Christian artists don't feel like they really have a home because they're not accepted by the mostly secular art world, and they're also not understood by their church communities. And there's a lot of conversation around how we can bring the visual arts into our church communities, as well as arts of other kinds, and support those who are creative and who have something to share. There should be a place and a way of exploring their gifts in the heart of the community that they feel so connected to. And there are a lot of discussions about what's the best way to do that, and how can the audience of the church better understand or relate to modern or contemporary trends. So it's a very complicated topic, but it's very important because it's also part of a larger movement of bringing an aesthetic awareness into the church community and into the liturgy and into the services and the opportunities for a congregation that a church provides. And it's also about, of course, supporting its members.
And that last piece there is where we're going to kind of go into to close out the conversation here, is the other piece of the building itself. And this is where leadership kind of fall, and maybe not even, I wouldn't even necessarily say modern current leadership. It was more of a, well, our favorite thing, Cold War era leadership, going back to even before Cold War, 1920s, with the rise of fundamentalism, is the buildings that, and Arthur, you can correct me if I'll just ask you if I'm wrong. The buildings, the European cathedrals, everything like that, they were not really built with classrooms, correct? Other than the ones that held actual schools, they were not built with classrooms, correct?
Right. That's correct.
I got that one right. So
I was gonna say, I was waiting for a sound if you got it wrong.
I've got that too. See, I've got that too, but I got that right. So there. So our buildings here, though, when you first walk into a church building, there are depending on which entrance you enter, obviously, but our church buildings are built with classrooms. Because Protestantism, we talked about this at the beginning, Protestantism in general is very much around, we want everyone to be educated in their faith. That was a key piece to the Reformation, was we don't need to go to the priest to learn this stuff. But what we now have started to see is that the education piece is playing a much bigger role than I think anybody ever anticipated. And it's actually now evident in the way that the buildings are designed, where the priorities actually are. Because if you walk into most church buildings that were built post 1920, especially those built in the actual Cold War, or those that were built post 2010, where do you find the youth ministry, children's ministry, nursery departments typically?
Towards the back.
They're in the back. They're in the basement. Some of them are actually on their own campus, basically. I mean, it's the same property, but they're off on their own campus. And this was initially done. The thought process behind it is they're loud, they're chaotic, they need their own space to be able to worship, which is what we are talking about. They need to be able to have their own space to worship in the way that is contextually relevant to them, which is not a bad mindset. And from a youth pastor perspective, I would have loved to have my own building where I wouldn't have to keep worrying about everybody, figuring out what he's doing with the money. But meaning what we're spending it on, not where we're hiding it. I better clarify that one.
I thought you were hiding it in the children's ministry room or something.
No. So, what are we doing with all this kind of stuff? But what it also shows is where the priority of the church is actually at. Because if you have these classrooms and you want to throw the kids off over in their own corner and let the adults have adult time and the kids have kid time, it shows that what you think you're showing is that your priorities are in your educating everybody in the family. Because everybody has a classroom, everybody can go to the classroom and be taught something on their level that's relevant to them about who God is, which is great. But what it's also showing is that the kids are an afterthought because they're off in the corner while the adults are doing big people stuff.
Well, I'll challenge that a little bit to the fact that of somebody that worked, I'll say like in the front at one of the churches, of not allowing people to come into the church and just take kids.
Right.
So I think it's that safety guard too of you're going to have to do a lot of work to get all the way back into the children's ministry and back out the doors.
And that is where
I could see that being one logistical setup that would make sense.
And that side of it is not what we're necessarily talking about. We're talking more on the fact that in putting them off in the corner and saying, you have your teachers over there. They are going to teach you the stuff that you need to know. While we have big people church in here. And we're going to talk just stuff that we need to know. We're not now, the focus is not about educating the family now. It's about educating people with what we think they need to know, not what the questions they actually have are. And especially when we talk, or even the Roman Catholic model with catechisms, everybody is taught the same thing from the time they are birth to grave, and everybody recites it together. Because it is much more of a communal aspect once you are inside the fort. It's about a community. But that's not necessarily what we are seeing within a lot of our evangelical models of we put the kids over here and they watch VeggieTales for a while we do the real theology stuff. It's getting better now. But when we were kids, part of the reason why there's such a big age generation gap within our churches here in America right now is in the fact that those born late 80s into, mid 90s, or maybe even say late 90s, were very much we were already written off as hopeless before some of us were even born. By the American church specifically. And it's shown in the way that they continue to build these buildings where they say, oh, look, we've got this big youth center. We've got the big gym, which it's sports minister. I'm all for the big gym. Let's do that. I have no problem with that. But I have a problem with the idea of you're advertising to your children that we are going to throw you in the gym way over here so you don't distract us. And you do your youth stuff, and you go have fun and play games while we do we do worship and theological training over here because that's adult stuff. There are churches even that I've applied to that the answer that comes back is that they can't have me in their youth department because I am too theologically minded.
Something that you would think you would want.
which is part of what I said as my response. But this is what we see when we go so far as to throw off the imagery, the architecture of where that stuff does not matter anymore, because we are focused only on the scriptures, and we are only focused on the guy up there that we think knows what he's talking about with the scriptures, and we completely ignore the atmosphere that we are actually creating. And now there's one other piece to this that we're going to close with, because I mentioned that one picture earlier on.
Of Jesus knocking at the door.
Jesus knocking. Arthur, do you know which one I'm referring to?
I know it because you showed it earlier. That's
yes.
I've
That's
never
why
seen it
I was
that.
making sure, because my like I said, my production one. Because see, there I go. Now I'm on the screen again. Let's remove me there. That picture was on the back wall of one of the churches that I was on staff at, and it just kind of looked out of place. Not because we were a Protestant church and it was imagery, just because it was just kind of randomly back there. And so I asked somebody why it was there. And they said, oh, well, this is a perfect representation of what Jesus does for us, which is part of what we've talked about earlier, is the point of the imagery within the church, is a representation, and it allows us to experience it and everything like that. And they said, because look at it, there's no doorknob on Jesus's side, which means that the only way that Jesus can come in is if you let him in. But there's a problem with that. Arthur, do you know what the problem with that interpretation of that picture is?
Well, to me, it's the same problem as one has in a literal read of the Bible, which is that there is no imagination and there is no space for interpretation. It's just a flat-footed, literal transcription of something which was deeply metaphoric in its initial moment, most probably, right? And there's a lot of misunderstanding around. There's a fear of interpretation. There's this idea that truth will come through the literal word of the Bible. There's a worship of the Bible itself, and it's not surprising that this same mentality goes to images, and we see that very commonly in images of Jesus. So I think you're right on the money there.
Well, and there's another problem with it, and it may not, I looking back on it, this one may not show it as clearly as the one that was hanging up. But there's one other problem with their interpretation. Do you know what it is, Brandon? Let's see. I won't buzz you if you're wrong, because it's not in front of you.
I can't think of, I'm thinking it has to be something with the handle related, as far as how the door would swing.
The way that the picture is set up, the side that you can see would be where the hinges are. And so Jesus is actually covering up where the doorknob would be in that picture. So we have no idea if there's a doorknob there or not. But like you said, it's been ingrained in them, this, we refer to as the Cold War theology version of, well, just ask Jesus into your heart and then he can come in and clean you, and then everything will be okay. They've been so ingrained with that mindset that when they looked at the picture, that was the only interpretation that they could see.
Yeah, which is funny. That was what you came up with, because immediately my brain went to ask, seek, and knock.
Right. Is
where my brain initially went.
Right. There's multiple verses of where we knock and the door will be open to us. Mm-hmm. It's not a matter of all that. And even the imagery of the only way that Jesus can come in is if we allow him. The ironic thing is that is both the opposite in a lot of ways of both what Calvinism teaches and Arminianism teaches. But that is still the wording that we use, and it shows up even in the way that we interpret the few images that we allow into the building. I'll go one step further before we close, and we are going to talk about this more later on. But going back into our Cold War theology stuff, if you want another picture of it, before I have to restart my system again for us to finish the show, is coming up here, Memorial Day into June and July, and then again in November around Veterans Day, is to look at the images that are suddenly allowed to be shown within your sanctuary. Because the same churches that will not allow a picture of Jesus, even a white Jesus picture in their sanctuaries, are probably going to have a lot of red, white, and blue suddenly show up come July 4th.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're not saying there's anything wrong with that. We're saying, though, that it does show a lot about what the priorities are of the heart of the people that are making the decisions. And it's much more in that area when it's decorations, it's the people making the decisions than it is even just your heart necessarily. Although it's always good to take a look at our own heart also.
Yeah, I was going to say it gets messy because we can't see their intentions.
Right.
So that's God to,
right.
to make
so
that.
We are out of time. Arthur, give us again where people can find you as far as if they want to read your stuff, if they want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about the stuff that you are doing.
Sure, I'd be happy to. My website, as you mentioned, is imageandfaith.com. And it is, as I said before, an archive of all of my writings. I'm an essayist. And you'll find links there to where the work has been published in the world. And I also have an area there on the website for my group Contemplatives in Conversation. And this is a community that meets every Saturday in the online meditation chapel that I lead. There's information and resources there. You can follow me on Twitter. And I also have a Facebook group for Contemplatives in Conversation that's growing every day. And there's a lot of really interesting discussion that happens there continuously. And I regularly will pose questions for the group and give people an opportunity to reflect on their own spiritual practices and understandings and have conversations around those questions so that there's always something lively happening in terms of exchanging ideas and sharing experiences. So Facebook,
Awesome.
Twitter, and my website. And I'm always adding to my website. So it would be great for your listeners and viewers to come check out my website, and even better if they subscribe to it. That way they'll get regular updates whenever new work is published, and it might be in written form or podcasts as well.
Awesome. Now, he's also going to have his, he'll have a guest portal on our website as well that has all those links. Those of you that are listening and cannot see the link to his website, again, that is imageandfaith.com. And I can't remember your Twitter handle, or else I would say, I think it's at Art, and then your last name that I already forgot how to pronounce. So sorry.
At Art Aghajanian. Yeah.
There we go.
That's it.
But yeah, go to the website. You can find that. Speaking of Facebook groups.
That's right. We've got our own where we've got some
right.
discussion going on.
That's right. So don't forget, you guys can join us on Facebook as well. You can also follow us on all the different social media platforms that are there: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Ministry Misfit. On Twitter, you can also try and follow Brandon if he could ever figure out his privacy settings.
Yeah, I don't even know if anyone saw that tweet I put out last weekend. So
I didn't, because you still haven't even added me, because you apparently don't like me.
No, that's not true. I just don't know how to figure that out. So I'll need to do that one day.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. But in the meantime, you can all. That's what it was. Don't forget also that this conversation that we just had live is going to be put out in normal platforms and everything in 2 weeks. So that would be on
Tuesday, May 10th.
Yes, May the 10th, because we have to write it down or our numbers are not going to be right. Next Tuesday, tune in to hear our episode with Dr. Joshua K. Smith talking about robots and theology. artificial intelligence, all that fun stuff, which I just realized I don't have any robot noises, which is very sad. You can also, that's the other thing, Patreon.
Yes.
Patreon. So we are getting ready to start a campaign on Patreon if my thing would, load
Is it
and work.
loading? Nope.
No, it's not. So go to patreon.com/Ministry Misfits. That's where you can find us. We've got 4 different levels. We are starting a campaign May 1st, which is 3 days from now? 2 days from now?
Yeah, just Sunday.
Is it Sunday? Okay.
Yep, Sunday.
Yeah. So we are going to be jumping in here, to do all of that. Yes. So Patreon. Sorry, I just got it back up and I'm not sure if it's working or not, but it looks like we're working now. So patreon.com/Ministry Misfits. Starting May 1st, which is where we were trying to get to before everything started freaking out. We are starting a campaign. We are looking for 20 patrons at any level. There's a reason why we have the number 20. Because 20 patrons at any level, including 20 of you at the $5 level, which is the lowest level, would actually get us pretty much fully funded at the minimum level that we need. That covers all of the software that allows us to do this. It allows us to do the software that actually works and the one that doesn't. It allows the soundboard did not cost anything. So just putting that out there. It's all good to go. But that covers everything from the live stream feed, the website feed, the Buzzsprout feed, which we didn't do our commercial because my thing broke. But, if you're interested in Buzzsprout, go to the website to the affiliate link. You can get that there. It also allows us to continue to do some work with TICFA, to do some work with Third Street, Tribe Collective, Martin Center, CSRM, Overwhelming Victory, all those places that we're partnered with is where a lot of that money is going to go.
Yeah. So again, we've got 4 different levels set up at $5, $10, $20,
$20, and then $100. Which the $100 level, you basically are going to become an executive producer at that point.
Yeah,
you don't have to do any work.
Misfit.
Yes, you don't, and you don't have to do any work, but you still get the executive production credits. So we are going from May 1st until the end of May. The goal is to get 20 patrons to have us at a fully funded level. Anybody that joins at any level will receive, assuming that you actually give us your mailing address, will receive one of the, what we call it, the mugs.
Misfit mugs?
I think, it's the Misfit mug because it's one with our faces on it.
Yeah.
Yes. The one with our nice new logo on it that also is a little bit colorful. Anybody that joins Patreon at any level in the month
during the month of May, yep,
will receive one of those in the mail.
On top of the other bonuses,
yes,
which you'll see on the website.
On top of the other bonuses, and anybody that joins in the month of May automatically will also get access to a couple of live streams, regardless of what level that you normally join at. So go to patreon.com/Ministry Misfits, and you can join us on there and partner with the work that we are doing. So I'm trying to think. Is that everything, Brandon?
I think it is.
Oh, the TICFA tees.
Yes.
The rest of the merchandise is still up. The TICFA tees, which we're hoping to be able to have a couple of people from TICFA, a couple of people from Third Street, a couple of people from Martin Center on here in the near future. We're also still working on getting the documentary set up, ready to go. Arthur, thank you for coming on. We are hoping to have you back as well to talk theology of comic books, which I am stoked, and I will have plenty of options to use our new soundboard for that one. I'm sure.
I saw Batman on the website, so I was curious how that one was in there. So I'm excited.
Yes. So everybody, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all of you that subscribe on any of our channels in general. Let us know how this goes. Let us know. I saw shout out to Mrs. Barron. She told us she could hear us, so that's always good. So at least we know people heard us this time. We're ahead of the game, Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
We are ahead of the game. That deserves applause.
There we go.
Yeah.
Little golf clap in the
Yes,
music.
little golf clap there. So we're still figuring out some of our levels on there. But anyway, thank you all for joining us. Again, the normal Misfit schedule is going to be back on Tuesday. Those of you that are listening to this have no idea what we're talking about a messed up schedule because it's already Tuesday.
Yeah.
So imagine that. So we want to thank you all for joining us, and we will see you all on Tuesday.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/Ministry Misfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Ministry Misfits.